This morning I'll be reading from Romans chapter 13, beginning with verse 8. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For he who loves his fellow man has fulfilled the law. The commandments: do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, and whatever other commandment there may be are summed up in this one rule: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to his neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. Lord, we thank you for the day you've given us, especially this opportunity to study your word. Guide us in all truth and help us to apply it in our lives as we strive to live for you. In your Son's name, amen. All right, it's quarter. I've kind of been in and out. It's about preaching and the ministry. We started off talking about a few things about our call to preach, to teach others. And we looked at John the Baptist and how he prepared the way for Christ in his ministry. And as we start looking at what it is we're supposed to be teaching and preaching and ministering to, we've kind of gone on from there. Last week we took a look at Matthew chapter 5, the beginning there with the Beatitudes. As we look at this, we need to we look at Matthew chapter 5, which we looked at last week, we will this week, and the next 2 weeks. This is kind of an important part to me in understanding the difference between Christianity, or the way God intended everything to be, which we see through Christ, versus the Old Testament, a lot of things that we see through the eyes of the prophets and the Pharisees and different people that wrote and acted those things out. And so a lot of times we talk about the Old Testament in a different way than the New Testament. And I think this is because of the way people saw it. And Jesus, in John chapter 1, said he came to basically be God here and show us who God was. But here in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, he teaches in those things. He teaches us a different way of looking at life than what most people were teaching and what was happening. The world's view is very simple. We're not going to talk about that much here, but it was very simple. It's about me, 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 me. We talked about that class after class after class. It's about that. Ended up with sin. That's how we got here in Genesis chapter 3. Ended up with death. This is chapter 3. Every time thereafter, and the problems with this world. All of that stemmed from this basic choice and worldview is to do my own thing. Of course, if you take that to the extreme, that's what dictators and everybody else are doing. People that oppress people are doing their own thing. And to the detriment of whoever else around them, because it doesn't matter. The second view, which is the other thing, which is what Jesus spends most of his time dealing with in his life, is what I call the religious view. Okay? He takes on the religious leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, day after day after day. You'll see that throughout the Gospels over and over again. He takes them on. Very rarely does he go and take on the non-believer, the non-follower of God. Most of the time he takes on God's people and what they believe, and the way they think, and the way they act. We find that in this, that's what takes place here. In the view, even in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, he says, you have heard it said. When he says that, he's talking about the religious view. What they think God says. Basically, it was a matter of a self-righteous, hypocritical view. It's what the Pharisees were known for. Jesus pointed it out time and time again. A lot of times today we see people that act and do these things and try to get all those things exactly right, and we end up, those people are referred to in exactly the same way. But it was a self-righteousness. It's one where they thought they could accomplish goodness and godliness on their own. In reality, it was hypocritical because they cannot do it. At every point, man does fail. Okay? And reverts back to the worldview. Sin. The third view is God's view. Religious, you have heard it said. God's view, but I say unto you. You will see that expression throughout Matthew 5, 6, and 7 repeatedly. Because what he's trying to do is contrast what you think and what your religious leaders are saying about what God wants versus what God really wants. So this is God's view. God's view is basically he wanted you to trust him with your whole heart. Yeah, he wanted obedience. But if you trust him with your whole heart, then those things come into take care of themselves. And that's what he was trying to do with it. When we do it, we've had classes where we show the difference between actions versus attitudes. You know, the Pharisees, the religious, had the actions right, but their attitudes were in the wrong place. Jesus deals with those. We use the example of hands and heart. It's the same thing. Your hands are doing what they're supposed to be doing, but your heart's just not in it. God says, quit. I don't want it. He said that from the beginning. It's a difference between self and selflessness. And those particular things. The writer in here talks about this book, not this book, this one here, these men, right, say that basically the things in Matthew and this and that and all these things in the Bible are part of the gospel, not according to Paul. The gospel, Paul clearly defines as the good news, which is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. All these other things are things related to it, good information, but when they say, the writer said Jesus was preaching the gospel sermon here, that is incorrect. As a matter of fact, Jesus in Matthew himself says in the second verse, and Jesus taught. He didn't preach, he was teaching them something, trying to show them something. And it was not the gospel, but it was something important that leads up to the gospel. All right, the gospel, as we said, was death, burial, and resurrection. Be summed up in John 3:16. What does that say? God so loved that he gave who? His Son. Without his Son, there is no death, burial, and resurrection, in order that all who believe, faith, might be saved. That's a quick summary of the gospel you can find in the Bible. So that's what the gospel is about. Jesus is not teaching that. But he is teaching how God's attitudes and our attitudes are leading up to what God is about to do through Jesus. So it's important. The Sermon on the Mount showed the true way to God and to godliness. Not man's, not the Pharisee who was sitting in the audience going, excuse me? The problem with the Pharisees, as you see throughout the Bible, is every time they thought they had him, they realized that the Scripture backed him up. So most of the time they zip their mouth. Most of the time. And but that's what the Sermon on the Mount is basically trying to show, the way to God and the way to godliness. Last week we took a look at the Beatitudes. Wasn't here, but basically it contrasted two different views. The world's view and God's view. You know? World's view, power and domination and great success. So what God says, he says meekness and gentleness. You know, everything there was a paradox. The world says take what you want, do whatever thrills you. God's view says give and you'll receive. And to do what God desires, not what you want to do. It's a paradox. Because it looks like if you do what the world says, you'll get what you want. You know, you'll get all the gusto and all the things out of life and all that you want. But the reality is you don't. If you do what God says to do, it looks like being meek is not going to get you anywhere. The reality is it will get you there. That's why it's such a paradox. It doesn't make sense. The difference really is between happiness and fun. The world talks in terms of happiness, and they're really talking about fun, excitement, thrill, joy. Not joy, but enjoyment of something. It's always short-lived, only lasts for a while. Ultimately, it will last till we die. On the other hand, God, when he talks about happiness, he's talking about something that can go all the way through those bad times that we're guaranteed to have. It's something that is beyond that and it actually goes into eternity. I want to take a look at Matthew chapter 5. After the Beatitudes, Jesus kind of explains what's going to happen here. And a lot of times we don't really grasped me specifically. You all may have figured it all out. But I didn't completely grasp why this was here and what it has to do with it. In the 5th chapter, verse 17, it says, "Do not think I've come to abolish the law of the prophets. I did not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." And he goes on and spends a few verses about it. What is he talking about? The law of Moses, but he says he didn't come to abolish it, to fulfill it. What is he talking about?
He had another plan that he would fix and put into position.
Do what?
He had another plan.
Another plan?
The law
Always look forward to the coming of the Messiah. It's more than that, because he's not even talking about the coming of the Messiah here. Okay? It's more than that. That includes that. Because ultimately Jesus is coming, and when he comes, the good news is coming. That is the good news. That is the gospel. So it is looking to that, where he will fulfill it, all that law and prophecy. But most of the time we look at that, we look at the part about him fulfilling the prophecies. What he's saying here is more than that. He goes on to say that if you will go on in verse 20, it says, "I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and teachers of the law, you will not enter the kingdom of the heaven." Because the Pharisees dealt with action. Romans, Paul answered the question in the verse we read. Romans, was it 13? Why do I have 8:8? Is it 8:8? 13:8. What did I say? 13:8. I just wrote it down wrong. I kept saying it was Romans 8 all day long, all morning long, and then every time I turned there, it wasn't there. Romans 13:8. He says, "Love does no harm to your neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law." The fulfillment of the law is love. What did Jesus do on the cross? He showed his love, therefore he fulfilled the law. What is man supposed to do? Love his neighbor, and in doing that, he will fulfill the law, which Paul just listed right above this. That's what he's going to talk about in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, following these verses. "You have heard it said, 'Thou shalt not murder.' I'm going to tell you what you do to fulfill the law." It's not about not killing, it's about loving. See, when you look at this, that's why he introduced this section into about the fulfillment of the laws, because he wanted to go on and say, here's what the law is really about. It's not about the actions, it's about the attitude or the heart that perceives the actions, which causes the actions to take place. And that's what God has always wanted. That's no secret. It's just that man has never concentrated on that, because they felt like, if I can just do this, got it made. Don't we do that today? Yeah, a lot of times. All right. So when you see that, he came to fulfill the law. Love is the fulfillment of the law. Christ's death, burial, and resurrection, that's God's actions motivated by his heart. Man's love for his fellow man is our actions motivated by our heart. Then we go into the section following that. It says, "You have heard it said," like we said, "do not murder." He says, so when we look at this, Jesus shows how godly people are to think and act. It's the correct response to God's law. Not just do it, but to do it from your heart. And what he's trying to say is, this is the life that man could expect through the gospel or the good news of Jesus Christ. And so he wanted to describe this. One class, I keep forgetting I don't have that microphone. So if I walk away and stand over here too long, tell me to get back over here until I get a microphone that follows me around. He's trying, and one of the classes that I taught related to this, I put this in these kind of terms. When the United States was first formed, we had a group of men that got together. What did they come up with? Confederation. Before that, what did they start with? What kind of document? Before the Constitution came after the Federation. All right, history. The Declaration of Independence. In that, they go through in detail why we're declaring ourselves a new nation. Go to the preamble of the Constitution, it defines and clarifies exactly why and what we're going to do with this country. A group of men come together and lay these things out. You go to the communism, when Russia decided to become a communist country, they laid out something called the Communist Manifesto. Very good. We're not very good at history. I try not to do it because I know we get video. Communist Manifesto, which basically lays out what communism is all about and how we're going to live our lives. You know what Jesus laid out? God's manifesto. God's layout. That's what Matthew 5, 6, and 7 says. You want to know what it's like to be godly, to live as God's people? This is what it looks like. And so it's why it's so important to me to understand this, is because that is what God is trying to describe how a Christian should be, what his people should be when the world views them, and the end result. So he goes on from there and says, this is the life you should be able to expect when you come to have the gospel, which is going to take place here in the next 3 years. Okay? Gospel's going to come. People are going to have a choice. Do you follow God, or do you follow after the Pharisees or the world or whatever other choice? And so he's trying to show them the benefits of what God's doing for them. So he lays it all out in this form, and he says, you have heard it said, thou shalt not murder. A commandment? Yes. But what he meant by that was don't become angry with your brother. Do not treat him with contempt. That's the term raka or fool. Well, it's really basically an attitude of looking down on someone because you just don't like the way they're doing things or what they've done to you or whatever. He says, forget about the murder. That's the last straw. Stop before you get to the first straw, which begins when you start getting angry about what somebody's done to you. The next one, he says, thou shalt not commit adultery. You know, that's the next commandment. What does he say here? Jesus say? Yeah, that's the last straw. Start in the first straw, which is lust. Looking at another woman or man. Just because this was a male-dominated society didn't mean that women couldn't do the other, especially in our society today. Don't look at another person in such a way that your desires are for them to cause you to be distracted from the wife of your, or the spouse of your youth. There, stop at the first straw. That was God's attitude. His attitude was, how do you take care of your spouse? Your relationship there. His attitude was not about divorce. What do you think Jesus went every time they asked him? He was kind of like, it's the wrong question. That was not so from the beginning, you know? Because the key thing to get out of that is not that the divorce is not what God wants, but the key thing to get out of it is he wants you to choose a spouse for your life and make a commitment and work together for it. Yes, some of us are stuck. I saw Bush today. I wouldn't say that about Sue, obviously. Be committed to the wife of our youth. No divorce. You know, when you start talking about divorce, you're already in the wrong place. You're already way past where God wanted you to be. Thou shalt not steal. What's Christ saying? What do you do if somebody takes something from you? Let them have it. Let them have it. You know, instead of trying to get what somebody else has, when they come to get yours, okay, is that important? Let it go. You know, that's a tough one for us Americans to do. I'll tell you right there. You know, we pack just for that purpose. You know. That doesn't mean we don't let the law do their own thing. That's not what he's saying there. He's saying your attitude should be, stuff is not important. Not enough that you take it from somebody else, but let's start at the first step, the first straw. Don't worry about it if somebody takes it from you. What's going to happen? He tells us what's going to happen to it eventually. Rust, decay, be burned up. You know, he says that in these same 3 chapters. So that's what he's trying to say here when he says don't steal. It's not about taking, because a lot of times we can kind of get right to that point. You know, he's saying it's your attitude on how you look at your stuff. Go the extra mile. Get the coat off your back. And every time somebody starts cringing about that, all I can think of, do you know what Jesus did on the cross? Did he curse the men who killed him? Or tortured him? Let's just do it that way. What did he do to the people who took the shirt off his back? So he lived the example as well as teaching it here. And this is what he's talking about when he says love fulfills the commandments. And we're looking at these commandments, and Jesus is turning them around and saying, this is what God's really talking about.
And not only, he went even further, but yes, same as mine. But then those same people, turn around and pray for them.
He did, in one way. Not just pray for them, but forgive them. Whoa, now, we've gone way too far there. We don't do that. They need to come and beg it first. I didn't say ask. I said beg. Because that's the attitude man has. That's why later on, as we look at this prayer, he says in there, ask God to forgive you how? Just like you forgive him. That makes a person choke and say, I'm not going to forgive me that way. Okay? All right, but anyway, so go the extra mile. Let him have it. Thou shalt not bear false witness or tell a lie. He goes on and he says, here, consider your oaths. You make a promise, it's not just to them. Who's it before? God. God hears every one of us. So if you say something and you promise to do something, you make a commitment to something, honor your commitment, because you're not just making it to them, you're making it for God. And it's not just, a lot of times we take this and say, okay, well, don't put your hand on the Bible and swear. I'm sorry. God listens to you 24/7. You make a promise with or without a Bible, that's still a promise. Honor your commitments. Don't be a liar. Don't say things about somebody and say, oh yeah, that's the way it is, that's true. Don't do that. Don't gossip. Don't say things. Don't twist the truth. That's what he's saying here. When he says, thou shalt not bear false witness, and he's saying, don't do these oaths because you don't have any power. God does. Keep your word. Let your yeses be yeses and your noes, noes. He's not saying, and a lot of times we say, okay, we got to limit our speech to just yes or no. He's saying more than that. He's saying, when you should be saying yes, don't say no. When you should be saying no, don't say yes. Don't bear false witness. Don't tell a lie that hurts your brothers or any of those kind of things. Don't lie. All right. Thou shalt not covet your neighbor's life. I wrote it that way. He said it talks about possessions, but it's more than that. Most of the time we may covet their car or their house, but a lot of times I wish we had what the Joneses or whoever has that's got more than us, or a better job, or a better political position, or more, whatever it is. I don't know what it is that each and every one of us when we look at others. And he's saying, don't do that. Don't worry about that. Instead, forget about your neighbor and what he has. Love your enemy. What? Now, let me ask you this. In Judaism, do they teach love your enemy? Eye for an eye. Do they still teach love your enemy? No. I'm about to go there in a month or two. I'm about to find out what it's like. Not that I want to. But the fact of the matter is, it wasn't. And they're not anything special there. Man is basically, that's man's basic attitude is, forget about your neighbor. I might do something for my neighbor, might not, but I'm definitely not going to do something for the guy that's out to hurt me. I think of Jesus washing Judas's feet. Nobody there knew Judas was the guy that was going to betray him and have him murdered. Why? Jesus didn't take it out of him. There'd been me there, and Jesus would have before, they would have known exactly. They would have been going, uh-oh, what did you just do? He's in trouble about something. Instead, we read after that they said, betray you? Who's going to do that? Jesus said, somebody's going to betray me, and I just got down and tear Judas' feet up. They didn't know who was in trouble. God doesn't act that way, and He doesn't want us to. Forget about your neighbor's life and this stuff, whatever. Treat your enemies the way they should be. God loves everyone. Matter of fact, He goes on to say that God loves and gives rain on the just and the unjust, the righteous, the unrighteous. He does the same thing for both because He loves both. And He goes on and finishes that section off by saying, be perfect. He says be perfect. He's not saying be without sin, but He's saying be perfect like He was in showing that love like He does. Okay? In everything that you do it for God. Chapter 6 gets into this when he starts talking about giving to the needy, as my Bible's titled it or whatever. And he starts to talk about giving. And it's basically saying, okay, there's some things that you do because you're God's people. All right, here's how you do it. Do it for God, not for man. The worldview is, if I'm going to do this, if I have to give this, then let's do it in such a way that benefits me. As a matter of fact, we didn't talk about one of the 10 Commandments was honor your father and your mother. Later on, Jesus attacks the way they behave that in another place. He doesn't here. But in that place, He basically says, okay, children, you're supposed to honor your mother and your father, so what you do is that you say, okay, sorry, Dad, I can't help you because the money I'm supposed to give, I have to give to the church or whatever else. And so they would dishonor their parents by taking it to give to the church so that they could get credit for it. You know, you ever seen those long lists when you give to some institution of who gave what, how much, and blah, 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 and they want to make sure, right, take that illustration, they want to make sure that they get the credit for it. That's what was happening. I want to make sure they did it. Even Jesus, in His last hours, when people came into the temple, you remember what they were doing? They were pulling out their pocketbooks, and they were reaching in, and they were pulling all this money out and fanning it in front of them and saying, there you go. They were showing how much they gave. And Jesus himself was watching some widow who had nothing. Reaches in and pulls out a couple little coins and sticks them in. And He points out how much He gave. The point was, there were people sitting there watching how much they gave. And Jesus says right here, when you give to the needy, quit giving in order to be seen as you walk into the temple. Instead, how are you supposed to give? Hey. Don't let one hand know what's going on. Point being, that's just an illustration. But basically the point is, just kind of keep it to yourself. Do your deeds before God and don't worry about it. Does that mean other people can't know? No. It just means you're not doing it in order to impress other folks. You're doing it because it's between you and God, and you're getting the reward from who? God. The fact of the matter is, if you go back to the Beatitudes we studied last week, all those rewards did not come from the world, did they? No. They came from God. Because if you follow what the world said, it didn't. You got some reward in this world immediately. Of course, it's not long term. You know, look at every dictator ever lived. They ended up, for the most part, pretty much dead. Pretty much, well, they all ended up dead. But I mean, murdered, executed, suicide, problems, people come after them, you know. So it doesn't end up like they think it is. But the point is, most of this comes from God. That's where the real reward is, when you get it from God. That's what affects true happiness. Because it's something that affects you down in your heart, not in your hands. You know? So when you give, do not announce it before others. Give in secret. Don't let your left know what the right's doing. Do it for God. When you pray, how should you do it? to be seen by men. Okay, I guess we need to cancel all prayers in church from now on, right? Is that what he's saying? He says, go in your closet. Cancel the trumpets. There you go. Cancel the trumpets. It was really about how they were doing it, not the fact that it was in public. Don't go around doing it in such a way to announce yourself that you're praying. Do it in such a way when you lead with a congregation, that you're actually leading them in thought. But what are we supposed to be doing when we're sitting in the pew? Praying ourselves in secret or whatever. Nobody knows what's going on in your head. All the person up here is doing is supposed to be leading us in a direction to make us think of things that we need to think about to ask God. When he says that, don't do it to be seen by men. It says, do not babble. My translation says, don't be a babbler like the rest of the world. What does that mean? Just yakking. Repetition, vain repetitions, flowery words. There's a lot of things that go into these big oratory speeches, He's saying, don't do that. That's not a prayer. How many times do you see somebody gets up and says the same thing, or they give this big flowery speech or whatever? One of the things that bothers me the most is when we start telling God what God already knows and has already told us. We start quoting Scripture to Him. You ever seen that done? Why are we doing that? To show we can. Or it sounds good, or whatever. I'm going to tell you, I'm the world's worst prayer. I have a hard time with it. I don't know what to say. I really don't. Every time, you'll notice, a lot of times, I'll just fumble all over myself, and my tongue just gets wrapped around my head. It's very difficult for me to say what I need to. That's why I'm glad the Spirit does it for me, because I don't do a good job. But we don't do that. You're not supposed to do that. We're not telling God what to do. What we need to be doing, He says in secret. What do you do in your closet when or in your small room when you're talking to somebody? Do you tell him what his book says? Do you say the same repetitions over and over? We know what they all are. Yeah, that's different. He's not saying don't say the same thing. He's saying don't do vain or worthless or empty repetitions. Huh? Hail Mary, Mother of God, that's somewhere else, but here we use. We got one. You'd probably catch me doing one here. Well, actually, I started one of my traditional before breakfast or before lunch prayers in here one day because I went off on the wrong one. Remember that? So I'm saying I'm guilty. I'm not trying to say I'm not. We all have a tendency to do those things. It's mind goes into autopilot. He says, don't do that. When you're having a conversation with somebody in your room, you're talking to them sincerely what you want to say. That's the kind of prayer God wants. When you're standing up here leading, it needs to be one, if you're one of those that are doing it, that is saying to God what we need to be talking about, like in a conversation. And for anybody in here speak Old English, don't speak Old English in your prayers. God doesn't need to do that. Speak English, speak American, whatever it is you speak.
Sing a song, forget about ourselves and worship Him.
Okay?
Pray and believe.
Yes. That's what he's talking about when he's talking about here. He's saying, yeah, you're supposed to pray. Yes, you're supposed to let the world know that you're in a close relationship with God, that you follow Him. Just don't make it into a display about you. Instead, have a genuine conversation with your Father.
And that doesn't mean that some phrases that we have tended to use can't be coming from the heart.
That is true.
Because if that is what is truly what you're wanting to say, and it's coming from the heart, then God hears it. And that's,
That's true.
We can't ban certain things because they've been said before.
So we can say, Hail Mary, what is it?
Just not repeated.
Well, there's a certain amount of truth into it, but the other thing we need to remember is if we do that habitually, maybe we ought to think back and say, maybe I need to think about this a little bit. But yeah, just because we've said it and we can still mean it from our heart, just like repetition. You know, sometimes you're just getting down and you're praying, please, 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 you know, and yeah, that's repetition. We're begging. But that's what begging is when we're begging God or our Father, please, 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 let me go. Let me do this. Let me do that. You know. So there is, you know, in the right context. Once again, Jesus' emphasis is not on the action. It's on the heart. And so all these things that we're talking about are displays of lack of heart, for the most part. But then not in every case. Not in every case. So let's keep that in mind. When you pray, do that. Sincere conversation with God in private. Ask Him. He wants you to ask. Did you notice that Jesus said, He says, starts off with saying, don't be like him. Your Father knows what you need before you ask. And then He turns around and says, this is how you should pray. Give us our daily bread. God already knows that. Forgive our debts. God already knows that. Lead us not into temptation. God already knows that. So here He says, God already knows, but what does He tell you to do? Ask anyway. Ask anyway. Talk to Him anyway. If you're not really sure what it is you're asking, which a lot of times I don't, especially when it comes to pain and suffering, you know, in this world, I don't know what the best result is. You know, we all want to be healed and cured. You know, sometimes that's not always happening. I went to a funeral of a 4-month-old baby that was yesterday that had a bad outlook. Matter of fact, what did we decide? 5% of them actually survive, or born and survive a year. Bad. I've never been to a funeral like that before in my life. But one of the things that impressed me most was the guy that was speaking basically said, while it tears us apart, hurts us terribly, which death always does. God said so. That's why that's the last enemy He's going to destroy, because it's an enemy. He also says, the baby's not there. It's in heaven with God, and will never face the pain and sorrow that we deal with in our lives. Whether we live to 100 or whatever, we'll never deal with that. So it's terrible, terrible it is in that situation. So a lot of times we don't even know what to pray for.
That's when the Holy Spirit delivers what we can't think, what we
Amen.
can't
And
express.
sometimes I think we need to lean on Him a little more than we do. You know, because we really don't know the answer. All right, so ask. God knows what you want and what you need. He didn't say what you want. He says He knows what you need. Ask anyway. But He also goes on and finishes off when we talk about forgiveness. He says, don't ask if you're not forgiving people, because God's going to dish out like you dish out. And Jesus talks later on about a guy that the master is forgiven, and the guy that was forgiven didn't forgive his fellow man. And the end result was worse than what he was in to begin with. So God's saying, don't come to Him asking for things and good gifts and graciousness and forgiveness and all those things if you're not willing to put it out yourself. And He just got done saying, live a life of love, which fulfills the commandments. Do all these things and feel and do it from your heart. This is how you live. All right? When you fast, keep it between you and God. We don't talk about fasting much. The Bible talks about it, and there's nothing that says don't. But fasting at that time is, and still today a lot of times, is something it's a show. You know, some places do it for Lent, whatever that is. But the Bible talks about if you're going to fast, that means you're taking a moment to set aside the world, concentrate on talking to God about certain things or whatever. If you're going to do it between you and Him. The world knows you're doing it. Apparently, you're not doing it right. That's pretty much what He's saying there, because it's not to be seen of men. And then the last thing I want to touch on today is our treasures. Who are you banking on? Now, we use that term, banking on. It goes back to the term about banks being trustworthy, reliable, where you put your treasures, your values. Who are you banking on? The world, it gives you a choice. A God says there's only two places to bank. You can bank on the world, you bank on Him, heaven. Where are you going to bank? You bank on the world and its treasures, you will have fun for a season. I heard a song, Season in the Sun. You will have fun for a season. Don't get me wrong, the world has fun. They have a lot of misery, but they have a lot of fun. But the other choice is if you bank on heaven and its treasures, you'll have happiness for eternity. You want fun or happiness? You want short-term, long-term? The choice is there, and he pretty much says that's what it is. You can't have both. You can't go on Sunday expecting happiness spending for eternity when you're spending Saturday night concentrating on fun for a season. You know, in contrast with God. All right, any thoughts, questions about what we've talked about so far? All right, we're going to spend the next 2 weeks, like I said, going on through Sermon on the Mount, as it's commonly referred to. And we'll pick up from there in the next lesson, which I don't like the way he's broken these Jesus in warnings and Jesus in worry and Jesus in challenges and all this, whatever. But we're going to take up next Matthew 6:25, where it says, "Thou shalt not worry." You know that is a commandment, right? I know we don't practice it, but it is a commandment. We'll see you next week.